In a dark alley, a police dog faces off against a gang, risking everything to protect his trainer. But when he's injured in the line of duty, no one expects the trainer to reveal why he's called the toughest cop in town. What happens next will leave you breathless. The city of Ironcliff wasn't known for its kindness. Its shadowy alleys and graffiti-covered walls told tales of crime, betrayal, and silent desperation. But even in a place like this, there were protectors, men and dogs who patrolled the streets, standing between chaos and order. Officer Jack Mason, a legend in the Force E, was one such protector. With his square jaw, piercing gaze, and a calm demeanor that concealed a history of triumphs, he was feared by criminals and respected by his peers. But Jack wasn't alone in his fight. By his side was Max, his trusted German shepherd, a highly trained police dog with instincts sharper than any blade. Together, they were an unstoppable duo, taking on cases others deemed too dangerous. But tonight, the stakes were different. The air was thick with tension as Jack and Max patrolled a part of town ruled by the notorious Steel Fangs gang, a group infamous for smuggling and ruthless violence. Whispers had reached the precinct about an illegal weapons deal taking place in the abandoned factory district. Jack volunteered without hesitation. Max, as always, was at his side, his dark fur blending into the shadows, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. As they approached the suspected location, the factory loomed like a ghost, its broken windows and rusted doors a testament to years of neglect. Jack's footsteps were silent, but Max moved like liquid shadow, alert, precise, and ready. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from Max's throat. Jack froze. He trusted Max's instincts implicitly. Before he could react, the door to the factory slammed open. Figures emerged, armed, dangerous, and clearly not expecting company. The Steel Fangs were caught off guard, but their surprise quickly turned to malice when they spotted Max. "What do we have here?" one of them sneered, a cruel grin spreading across his face. The atmosphere turned electric. Max stood his ground, his body tense and his teeth bared, as if daring them to make a move. Jack gripped his radio, about to call for backup, when chaos erupted. The first strike came fast. A steel pipe swung through the air, aimed directly at Max. Jack shouted, but it was too late. Max yelped, the sound cutting through the night like a knife. Little did the gang know, they had just made the gravest mistake of their lives. The silence that followed Max's yelp was deafening. Jack's eyes darkened with fury as he turned toward the gang members, his hand instinctively reaching for his holstered weapon. Max, though injured, attempted to rise, his determination stronger than the pain coursing through his body. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, but Jack knew he needed to act fast to protect his partner. "Big mistake," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice low and laced with menace. The gang's leader, a tall man with tattoos crawling up his neck like vines, stepped forward, brandishing a crowbar. His name was Rocco, and he was known for his ruthlessness. "Looks like your little pup's not so tough after all, officer," Rocco taunted, his gang laughing in unison. "Why don't you hand over your gun and leave while you still can?" Jack remained still, his sharp mind assessing the situation. He counted 6 gang members, each armed with pipes, chains, or knives. Backup was still minutes away, but Jack knew he couldn't afford to wait. His priority was Max. "Max, stay down," Jack commanded, his voice calm but firm. The dog, though visibly in pain, obeyed, retreating behind Jack with a low growl that warned the gang he wasn't finished yet. The factory was poorly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows. Broken machinery and stacks of crates littered the space, providing potential cover, but also hiding places for the gang's reinforcements. Jack moved subtly, positioning himself between Max and the gang while his mind raced to formulate a plan. "I'm giving you one chance, Rocco," Jack said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Stand down, or you'll regret laying a hand on my partner." Rocco smirked, clearly unimpressed. "You think you're the tough guy here? This is our territory. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of your league." The gang began to fan out, their movements calculated as they encircled Jack and Max. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, lunged forward, swinging a chain toward Jack. Jack moved like lightning, sidestepping the attack and delivering a precise strike to the man's wrist, sending the chain clattering to the floor. The gang member howled in pain, clutching his arm as Jack turned to face the next threat. Rocco's smirk faltered slightly. "You're gonna regret that, cop," he growled, motioning for his men to attack. As the gang charged, Jack fought with a controlled fury, his training and instincts kicking in. His movements were efficient and brutal, each punch and kick designed to incapacitate. Despite his best efforts, the numbers began to overwhelm him. A blow landed on his shoulder, another grazing his ribs, but Jack didn't falter. Max, sensing his partner's struggle, ignored his injuries and sprang into action. The dog lunged at one of the attackers, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The gang member screamed, trying to shake Max off, but the dog held firm. The sight of Max fighting back ignited something in Jack. With renewed determination, he took down another attacker, using a broken pipe to block a swing aimed at his head. The gang was relentless, but so was he. In the chaos, Rocco slipped away toward the shadows, muttering orders into a radio. Jack's sharp eyes caught the movement, and his heart sank. More reinforcements were on the way. "Max, fall back," Jack commanded, retreating toward a stack of crates to regroup. The dog limped to his side, his eyes still burning with defiance despite his injuries. As Jack knelt beside Max, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 23, backup is inbound. ETA 3 minutes, sir." 3 minutes. It might as well have been an eternity. "You're gonna be okay, buddy," Jack whispered to Max, stroking the dog's head. Max let out a low whine, his trust in Jack unshaken. The sound of footsteps interrupted the moment. Jack looked up to see Rocco returning, flanked by 4 more gang members. They were heavily armed, their weapons glinting in the dim light. "You should have walked away, officer," Rocco sneered. "Now you and your mutt are gonna pay." Jack's grip tightened on the broken pipe in his hand. His mind raced as he calculated his next move. He couldn't let them win. Not here, not now. Max's life depended on him. As the gang closed in, Jack took a deep breath, preparing to make his stand. The odds were against him, but he'd faced impossible situations before. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Max, for justice, and for every innocent person who counted on them to keep the streets safe. "Let's dance," Jack muttered, rising to his feet. The gang surrounded Jack and Max, their weapons raised and malicious grins spread across their faces. The tension in the air was thick, every second stretching into an eternity. Jack knew he was outnumbered, but retreat wasn't an option, not with Max injured and more lives at stake. "Last chance and Rocco," Jack said, his voice low and firm, masking the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. "Walk away while you still can." Rocco laughed, the sound cold and grating. "You think you're in control here, cop? This is my world." With a quick motion, Rocco signaled his men to advance. Jack braced himself, gripping the broken pipe tightly, but just as the gang lunged forward, an ear-splitting siren cut through the air. "Police backup." The gang faltered, their momentum broken as red and blue lights flashed through the factory's shattered windows. The sound of car doors slamming and heavy boots hitting the pavement echoed from outside. Jack's radio crackled again, the voice of his precinct sergeant coming through loud and clear. "Officer Mason, we're on site. Hold your position." Relief washed over Jack, but only for a moment. He knew the gang wouldn't give up without a fight. Rocco's grin disappeared, replaced by a snarl. "You called for backup. You think that changes anything?" Jack didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his stance, preparing for what he knew would be a chaotic standoff. The gang members exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering as the sirens grew louder. "Boss, maybe we should bail," one of them muttered, clutching a crowbar tightly. "Cops aren't gonna play nice." But Rocco wasn't ready to give up. "No one leaves," he barked, his eyes burning with fury. "We finish this now." Before Jack could react, Rocco raised a gun, aiming it directly at him. The room seemed to freeze. Jack's heart pounded as he calculated his next move. There was no time to duck, no cover to shield him or Max. This was it. A loud crash shattered the tension as the factory door burst open, and a team of officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Freeze! Drop your weapons!" their commander shouted, his voice reverberating off the factory walls. Rocco hesitated for a split second, and that was all Jack needed. With a swift motion, Jack hurled the broken pipe at Rocco, knocking the gun from his hand. The weapon clattered to the ground and chaos erupted. The gang scattered, some attempting to flee while others charged at the officers in a last-ditch effort to escape capture. The factory became a blur of movement as shouts, scuffles, and the clanging of weapons filled the air. Jack stayed close to Max, shielding the dog as best he could while helping the officers subdue the gang. Rocco, realizing he was losing control, made a desperate attempt to escape. He sprinted toward a side exit, but Jack was faster. Ignoring the ache in his body, he tackled Rocco to the ground, pinning him with a force that left no room for resistance. "It's over, Rocco," Jack growled, his voice heavy with authority. Rocco struggled, but Jack held firm until another officer arrived to cuff the gang leader. As Rocco was dragged away, his eyes burned with hatred. "You'll pay for this, Mason," he spat. "You and that mutt of yours." Jack didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. With the gang subdued and backup securing the area, Jack finally turned his attention back to Max. The dog was lying on the ground, his breathing shallow but steady. An officer approached with a first aid kit, kneeling beside them. "How's he doing?" Jack asked, his voice softer now, tinged with worry. The officer examined Max carefully. "He's tough, just like his trainer. He's going to need some stitches, but he'll pull through." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Good boy, Max," he murmured, stroking the dog's head. "How you're one hell of a partner." As the adrenaline began to fade, Jack sat beside Max, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The factory was now under control, the gang members in custody and the illegal weapons seized. But Jack couldn't shake the weight of Rocco's words or the realization that this battle, though won, was far from over. One of the officers approached, handing Jack a bottle of water. "You okay, Mason?" Jack nodded, taking a sip. "I'll live." "What about the gang?" "All accounted for," the officer replied. "Rocco's going to be answering a lot of questions. We'll make sure he doesn't see the light of day for a long time." Jack nodded, but his focus was on Max. The dog's loyalty and bravery had once again saved lives, but Jack couldn't ignore the toll it had taken on his partner. He made a silent promise then and there. He would do whatever it took to ensure Max got the care and rest he deserved. As the factory's chaos subsided, the police presence outside intensified. Officers catalogued evidence, photographed the scene, and secured the gang members in waiting squad cars. Jack, however, had eyes only for Max. The dog lay still, his sides rising and falling slowly, the adrenaline of the moment replaced by exhaustion. A paramedic approached with a stretcher, her face a mixture of professionalism and concern. "Officer Mason, we can take a closer look at Max back at the station's medical unit. He'll be in good hands." Jack nodded, his hand resting on Max's head. "Thanks, but I'm staying with him. He's not just a partner, he's family." The paramedic smiled softly. "Of course. Let's get him comfortable." As they carefully lifted Max onto the stretcher, Jack stood guard, his presence a constant reassurance for his injured companion. Other officers gave him space, understanding the unspoken bond between a handler and his dog. Officer Ramirez, Jack's longtime colleague and friend, walked over, a clipboard in hand. "Rocco and his goons are secured. We've found enough weapons here to arm a small militia. The DA is going to have a field day." Jack's jaw tightened. "Good, but Rocco's not done. He'll come back at me one way or another." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You've faced threats before, Jack. What's different this time?" Jack glanced at Max, his expression grim. This time, he aimed for Max. "He knew how to hit me where it hurts." Ramirez placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance. You've got the precinct behind you. We'll keep Max safe." Jack gave a small nod, appreciating the support, but knowing the fight was far from over. Back at the station, Max was placed in the care of the unit's veterinarian, Dr. Elena Vaughn. She greeted Jack with her usual calm demeanor, but her eyes betrayed concern. "Jack, he's stable, but I need to clean and stitch these wounds. There's no sign of internal damage, but he'll need time to heal." Jack stayed by Max's side as Elena worked, whispering words of encouragement to the dog. "You're tough, buddy. Tougher than me, that's for sure." Elena smiled briefly. "He's in good hands, Jack. You've trained him well, and it shows. He didn't panic, even when injured." As Max was sedated for the procedure, Jack's exhaustion began to creep in. He leaned against the wall, replaying the events of the day in his mind. Every detail of Rocco's smirk and the gang's taunts etched themselves into his memory. The message was clear. They weren't just targeting him anymore, they were targeting Max too. Meanwhile, Rocco was in an interrogation room, flanked by 2 officers and a detective. Despite the situation, he exuded an air of defiance, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "You think this is over?" he sneered. "You'll lock me up, but I've got connections. Mason won't know what hit him." The detective, a seasoned veteran named Sarah Chen, didn't rise to the bait. "You made a mistake going after Mason's dog," she said evenly. "You underestimated what that team can do." Rocco laughed. "A dog and a washed-up cop. They're nothing." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That washed-up cop just dismantled your operation. You might want to think twice before underestimating him again." Rocco's grin faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see." Back in the precinct's common area, Jack sat at a desk surrounded by supportive colleagues. Ramirez handed him a cup of coffee, and another officer placed a tray of sandwiches nearby. "Eat, Mason," Ramirez said firmly. "You need your strength if you're going to take Rocco down." Jack managed a small smile. "Thanks, but my appetite's shot." Before Ramirez could respond, the precinct's captain entered, her expression a mix of pride and concern. "Mason," she said, "you handled yourself well today, but I need you to know that this isn't just about you anymore. Rocco's made it personal." Jack met her gaze. "I know. He went after Max." "That changes everything." The captain nodded. "Then we change our approach. We'll keep Max protected while he recovers, and we'll make sure Rocco and his crew don't get another chance." "You have my word." Jack nodded, his resolve solidifying. "We don't just protect Max, we end this." As the night wore on, Jack returned to the medical unit to check on Max. The dog was awake but groggy, his bandaged injuries a stark reminder of the day's events. Jack knelt beside him, his voice soft. "You did good, buddy. You always do. We're going to get through this. Together." Max's tail wagged faintly, a small but powerful sign of his enduring spirit. Jack felt a surge of determination. Rocco had underestimated them, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. The precinct buzzed with activity as Jack prepared to dig deeper into Rocco's network. Reports of smaller gangs tied to Rocco's operation were coming in, signaling that the day's raid had barely scratched the surface. The captain had tasked Jack and Ramirez with uncovering the full extent of Rocco's influence. Jack, however, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Rocco was still several steps ahead. Max, now resting in the station's secure kennel, had become the focus of concern for many officers. Though his physical injuries were on the mend, the attack had left its mark on everyone, reminding them just how ruthless Rocco's crew could be. Jack visited Max regularly, his presence calming the dog and renewing Jack's resolve. Block 5. Introduction of subplots or additional challenges. 800 words. The precinct buzzed with activity as Jack prepared to dig deeper into Rocco's network. Reports of smaller gangs tied to Rocco's operation were coming in, signaling that the day's raid had barely scratched the surface. The captain had tasked Jack and Ramirez with uncovering the full extent of Rocco's influence. Jack, however, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Rocco was still several steps ahead. Max, now resting in the station's secure kennel, had become the focus of concern for many officers. Though his physical injuries were on the mend, the attack had left its mark on everyone, reminding them just how ruthless Rocco's crew could be. Jack visited Max regularly, his presence calming the dog and renewing Jack's resolve. That evening, Jack met with Ramirez in the precinct's briefing room. A sprawling map of the city covered the wall, dotted with pushpins marking suspected gang activity. Ramirez tapped one of the pins near the industrial district. "We've got a lead here," Ramirez said. "A warehouse Rocco's crew might have used as a drop site. Surveillance shows increased activity over the past week, even though we thought it was abandoned." Jack studied the map, his jaw tightening. "If Rocco's still trying to move product, we need to shut it down." "What's the plan?" Ramirez hesitated. "Here's the catch. We don't know how secure the location is or how many people are inside. Going in blind is risky, especially if they're expecting us." Jack crossed his arms, his mind racing. "Then we don't go in blind. We use someone who can get close without raising suspicion." Ramirez frowned. "Who'd be crazy enough to infiltrate Rocco's network after what happened today?" Jack's gaze drifted to the kennel, where Max lay resting. A plan began to take shape in his mind. The next morning, Jack met with Dr. Vaughn in the kennel. Max greeted him with a wagging tail, his strength slowly returning. Jack knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "You up for a challenge, buddy?" Jack asked softly. "We've got some unfinished business." Dr. Vaughn frowned. "Jack, he's still healing. Whatever you're thinking, it's too soon." Jack stood, his expression determined. "I know Max better than anyone. If he's up for it, he'll let me know." Max's ears perked up, and he nudged Jack's hand with his nose, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Dr. Vaughn sighed. "I can't stop you, but please, don't push him too hard." That afternoon, Jack and Ramirez devised a plan. Using Max's highly trained tracking skills, they would scout the warehouse perimeter to gather intel before committing to a full raid. Max would wear a small camera attached to his harness, allowing the team to monitor his findings in real time. The risk was high, but Jack trusted Max's instincts more than any piece of technology. As they prepared, Ramirez voiced his concerns. "Jack, if this goes sideways, Max could be in serious danger." Jack tightened Max's harness, his movements deliberate. "I know the risks, but if anyone can pull this off, it's Max." Under the cover of darkness, Jack, Ramirez, and a small tactical team approached the warehouse. They parked a block away, their vehicles hidden from view. Jack crouched beside Max, speaking in a calm, steady tone. "All right, buddy. You're going to do what you do best. Find the bad guys. Stay low, stay quiet, and come back to me." Max's tail wagged once, his sharp eyes focused on Jack's face. Ramirez handed Jack the control pad for the camera feed. "We'll guide him from here." Max slipped through a gap in the fence, his movements silent and precise. The team watched the live feed, their tension palpable as Max navigated the darkened grounds. The camera captured glimpses of movement inside the warehouse, figures unloading crates and stacks of cash. Suddenly, a loud clatter echoed through the feed. Max froze, his ears swiveling to pinpoint the source of the noise. The team held their breath as a guard emerged, scanning the area with a flashlight. Max crouched low, blending into the shadows, his training kicking in. "Come on, Max," Jack whispered, his grip tightening on the control pad. "You've got this." The guard moved on, oblivious to the dog mere feet away. Max resumed his mission, slipping closer to the warehouse's open door. The camera feed revealed rows of crates marked with gang symbols and stacks of weapons, evidence that could dismantle Rocco's operation. But then Max paused, his body tense. The team watched as the feed panned to reveal a row of cages in the corner. Inside were dogs, thin, injured, and clearly mistreated. Jack's heart sank. Rocco's cruelty extended beyond humans. "We can't wait," Jack said, his voice steely. "We go in now." The team mobilized, moving swiftly and silently toward the warehouse. Jack's focus remained on the feed, guiding Max toward safety while preparing for the raid. As they breached the building, chaos erupted, shouts, barking, and the sound of boots on concrete filled the air. Jack called out to Max, his voice cutting through the noise. "Max, to me!" The dog appeared moments later, sprinting toward Jack with a triumphant bark. Together, they joined the fray, determined to end Rocco's reign of terror once and for all. The warehouse raid unfolded with intense precision, the officers sweeping through the facility like a well-oiled machine. Jack and Max worked side by side, their bond unshakable even in the midst of chaos. Despite the gunfire and shouts, Max moved with controlled determination, his sharp instincts guiding him to avoid danger while assisting his team. As Jack approached the row of cages containing the mistreated dogs, a pang of guilt struck him. These animals, helpless and vulnerable, were victims of the same cruelty that had nearly taken Max from him. He called out to Ramirez, who was securing a group of gang members nearby. "Ramirez, we need to get these dogs out of here. They've suffered enough." Ramirez jogged over, taking in the sight of the malnourished and frightened animals. "You're right. Let's get animal control on this immediately." Jack knelt by one of the cages, speaking softly to a trembling German shepherd. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice steady and reassuring. Max sat beside him, wagging his tail gently, as if to convey the same message. As the raid drew to a close, the officers regrouped outside, their expressions a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. Several gang members, including Rocco's second-in-command, had been apprehended, and the confiscated evidence painted a clear picture of the gang's illicit operations. Captain Hernandez arrived on the scene, her sharp gaze taking in the team's success. She approached Jack, a rare smile breaking her usually stern demeanor. "Mason, you and Max did exceptional work tonight. This is a big win, not just for the precinct, but for the city." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter for Max. The dog was nearby, being gently examined by Dr. Vaughn, who had arrived to assist with the rescued animals. "Thanks, Captain. But it's not over yet. Rocco's still out there." The captain's expression turned serious. "We'll find him. Tonight was a major setback for his operation. He'll slip up eventually." Jack clenched his fists, the memory of Max's injuries fueling his determination. "I won't let him get away with what he's done." Later that night, back at the precinct, The team gathered in the briefing room to debrief. The rescued dogs had been transported to a nearby shelter, and the confiscated goods were being catalogued as evidence. Max lay on a blanket beside Jack's chair, his tail thumping softly against the floor whenever someone approached to praise his bravery. Ramirez handed Jack a cup of coffee, his tone light but concerned. "You should be proud, man. Max is a hero. But you've got that look again." "What look?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "The one that says you're not done, that you're already planning your next move," Ramirez replied. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "How can I not? Rocco's out there, probably plotting his next attack. I can't just sit back and wait." Ramirez nodded slowly. "I get it, but you've got to pace yourself, Jack. Max needs time to recover, and so do you." Before Jack could respond, Dr. Vaughn entered the room, carrying a folder of medical reports. She gave Jack a reassuring smile. "Max is healing well, but he'll need a few weeks of rest before he's back to full strength." Jack nodded, his expression softening as he glanced at Max. "Thanks, Doc. I'll make sure he gets the care he needs." Dr. Vaughn hesitated, then added, "Jack, I know you're driven, but don't let your anger cloud your judgment. Max trusts you to make the right decisions, for both of you." Her words struck a chord, and Jack nodded again, more solemnly this time. "I hear you, Doc. Thanks." As the precinct quieted down for the night, Jack sat alone with Max in the kennel. The events of the day replayed in his mind, each moment sharpening his resolve. He scratched behind Max's ears, his voice low. "We've been through worse, haven't we, buddy? But this time, it feels different. Rocco's not just another thug. He's personal." Max rested his head on Jack's lap, his trust unwavering. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count. He leaned down, whispering, "We'll finish this, Max. Together." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room across the city, Rocco sat at a desk, his face shadowed by the faint glow of a desk lamp. His second-in-command's capture had shaken him, but his fury outweighed his fear. "They think they've won," Rocco muttered, his voice low and venomous. "But Mason doesn't know who he's messing with." A younger gang member hesitated at the door. "Boss, what's the plan?" Rocco's lips curled into a sinister smile. "We hit him where it hurts the most. He thinks he's untouchable, but everyone has a breaking point." The gang member nodded nervously. "What about the dog?" Rocco's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, we'll deal with the dog. But first, we'll make Mason watch." Back at the precinct, Jack's phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen, accompanied by a grainy photo of Max's kennel. The accompanying text read, "You should have stayed out of this, Mason. Now it's personal." Jack's blood ran cold. The game was far from over. Jack's pulse quickened as he stared at the threatening message on his phone. The image of Max's kennel sent a chill down his spine. Whoever sent this wasn't bluffing. His first instinct was to check on Max, but the dog was still peacefully resting at his feet, oblivious to the looming danger. Jack clenched his jaw, his mind racing. This wasn't just a threat. It was a calculated move by Rocco to get inside his head. Without wasting a moment, Jack forwarded the message to Ramirez and Captain Hernandez, adding a brief note. "We have a serious problem. I need backup at the precinct." He stood abruptly, startling Max, who perked up and followed him as Jack began pacing the room. Minutes later, Ramirez burst into the room, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "What the hell is going on, Jack?" Jack showed him the message, his voice low but tense. "Rocco knows where we are. He's not just coming for me. He's coming for Max. This isn't just a gang vendetta anymore. He's trying to break me." Ramirez examined the message, his brow furrowing. "This guy's playing dirty, but we can use it to our advantage. If he's reaching out, it means he's desperate. He's making mistakes." Jack nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "Mistakes or not, we need to move Max somewhere safe. If Rocco gets to him..." His voice caught, and he shook his head, unwilling to finish the thought. Just then, Captain Hernandez entered, her usual composed demeanor replaced with a hint of urgency. "I've already alerted the team. We're locking down the precinct and securing Max. But Jack, you need to think carefully about your next move. If Rocco's willing to go this far, he's capable of anything." Jack met her gaze, his eyes steely. "I'm not backing down, Captain. Max is more than just a partner. He's family. I won't let Rocco win." As the precinct went into lockdown, Jack stayed close to Max, his protective instincts on high alert. The other officers worked tirelessly to strengthen security measures, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Rocco had something bigger planned. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corners of the room felt like a potential threat. Dr. Vaughn arrived shortly after, her face pale as she approached Jack. "I heard about the threat. Is Max okay?" "He's fine for now," Jack replied, his voice tight. "But I don't trust that Rocco won't try something. He's already crossed too many lines." Dr. Vaughn crouched down, stroking Max's fur gently. "Jack, you need to think about what's best for Max. Maybe it's time to consider moving him to a secure facility, at least until this is over." Jack bristled at the suggestion, his protective instincts flaring. "I'm not sending him away. He stays with me." Dr. Vaughn sighed but didn't push the issue. "Just promise me you'll keep him safe." Meanwhile, across the city, Rocco gathered his remaining loyalists in a dimly lit warehouse. He paced back and forth, his rage palpable. Mason thinks he's untouchable, but he's about to learn otherwise. That dog of his, it's his weakness. "We take the dog. We take him down." One of his men hesitated before speaking. "Boss, hitting a cop's dog is risky. It'll bring more heat on us." Rocco stopped pacing, his glare silencing the man instantly. "I'm not asking for opinions. We move tonight." The gang began preparing for their assault, their weapons gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. Rocco's plan was simple but ruthless: infiltrate the precinct, take Max, and leave a message that Jack would never forget. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Ramirez stayed by Jack's side, his usual light-hearted demeanor replaced with a grim focus. "So, what's the plan? We can't just sit here and wait for Rocco to make his move." Jack glanced at Max, who lay quietly by his feet, seemingly unaware of the danger. "We turn this around. If Rocco's coming for Max, we use it to lure him out. But we need to be ready for anything." Captain Hernandez joined them, her arms crossed. "We've set up a perimeter around the precinct and called in reinforcements. But Jack, are you sure about this? Using Max as bait, it's a risky move." Jack's jaw tightened. "It's the only way to end this. Rocco's not going to stop until he gets what he wants, but he's underestimated us, and Max." As night fell, the precinct's lights cast long shadows across the empty streets. Inside, the officers prepared for an ambush, their radios crackling with updates from the perimeter team. Jack stayed close to Max, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the building. Jack's instincts kicked in, and he crouched low, signaling for Max to stay close. The officers sprang into action, their weapons drawn as they moved to secure the breach. Through the chaos, Jack spotted a figure moving in the shadows. It was Rocco, his presence as menacing as ever. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. "You shouldn't have messed with me, Mason," Rocco sneered, his voice dripping with malice. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. "You made it personal, Rocco, and now you'll pay for it." As the tension reached a breaking point, Rocco signaled to his men, who began flooding the precinct with smoke grenades. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning chemicals, and the officers struggled to maintain their positions. Through the haze, Jack stayed focused on Max, his voice steady as he gave commands. "Stay closer, buddy. We've got this." Max responded with a low growl, his sharp instincts cutting through the chaos. Together, they prepared for the fight of their lives. The chaos inside the precinct intensified as the smoke thickened, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The crackling sound of shattered glass and distant shouts created a cacophony of danger, but Jack's focus remained razor-sharp. Max was right beside him, his body tense and ready. Even through the haze, the retired war dog's keen instincts guided Jack towards safety. "Ramirez, report," Jack barked into his radio. "We've got movement on the west side." Ramirez's voice crackled through the static. "They're breaching, Jack. Multiple targets." Jack's grip on his weapon tightened as he glanced at Max. "We're not going to let them get through." Meanwhile, Captain Hernandez coordinated the officers, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Focus on containment. No one gets past the inner perimeter. Keep the civilians out of harm's way." Despite the overwhelming odds, the officers remained steadfast, their training kicking in. Hernandez's calm but authoritative tone kept the team focused as they systematically pushed back against the invaders. Dr. Vaughn, who had stayed behind to monitor Max, found herself in an impromptu command post with Captain Hernandez. Though visibly shaken, She contributed by offering medical expertise and monitoring the security feeds. "They're splitting into teams," she observed, pointing at the screens. "One group is causing a distraction while the others are heading for Max." Hernandez nodded grimly. "Rocco knows what he's doing. He's counting on us being too scattered to respond effectively." Back in the thick of it, Jack moved through the corridors with Max at his side, the two of them operating as a seamless unit. Despite the years since Max's active service, the dog's training was evident in every move he made. He stayed close to Jack, his sharp eyes scanning the environment for threats. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, lunging toward Jack with a crowbar. Max reacted instantly, his powerful jaws clamping down on the attacker's arm, disarming him with a swift, precise motion. Jack quickly secured the man, his eyes darting to Max with a grateful nod. "Good boy." Elsewhere in the precinct, Ramirez and a team of officers engaged another group of Rocco's men. The gang's coordinated attack tested the officers' resolve, but Ramirez's quick thinking and resourcefulness kept his team one step ahead. Using the layout of the building to their advantage, they managed to isolate and detain several intruders. "Jack, we're holding them off, but you need to secure Max." Ramirez's voice came through the radio. "They're making a hard push for the kennel area." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew that Max was the target, and Rocco wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. As Jack and Max made their way toward the kennel area, they encountered more of Rocco's men. Each confrontation was a test of Jack's resolve and Max's loyalty. Despite the chaos, the bond between them shone through. Jack's commands were sharp and decisive, and Max responded with unwavering precision. At one point, they encountered a group of 3 gang members attempting to breach the kennel's reinforced door. Max let out a low growl. His body coiled like a spring. Jack gave a single command. "Go!" Max surged forward, his powerful frame a blur as he tackled one of the intruders. The others panicked, their weapons clattering to the ground as they tried to fend off the determined dog. Jack moved in quickly, neutralizing the remaining threats with calculated efficiency. Meanwhile, Rocco watched the chaos unfold from a hidden vantage point. His frustration was palpable as he realized that his men were being systematically outmaneuvered. He clenched his fists, his mind racing for a way to turn the tide. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself. "If I can't take Max, I'll make sure Mason pays another way." Rocco's focus shifted to the precinct's power supply. With a cruel smile, he hatched a plan to plunge the building into darkness, hoping to create even more confusion and give his men the upper hand. As the lights flickered ominously, Jack's radio crackled with a warning from Hernandez. "Jack, we've got a problem. Rocco's men are targeting the power grid. If they take it out, we'll lose surveillance and containment." Jack's jaw tightened. "We're heading there now. Keep me updated." With Max leading the way, Jack moved swiftly through the precinct, his determination unwavering. The bond between him and Max was more than just handler and dog. It was a partnership built on trust and loyalty, forged in the fires of adversity. When they reached the power grid, they found Rocco himself overseeing the sabotage. The gang leader's confidence faltered for a moment when he saw Jack and Max, but he quickly recovered, drawing a knife and stepping forward with a sneer. "Well, well, Mason, you've been a thorn in my side for too long. Let's end this." Jack raised his weapon, his voice calm but firm. "Step away from the grid, Rocco. This doesn't have to end badly for you." Rocco laughed, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can stop me? You're just a washed-up cop hiding behind a mutt." But before Rocco could make another move, Max growled, his sharp eyes locked on the gang leader. Jack gave a single command, "Protect!" Max lunged forward, forcing Rocco to retreat. Jack moved in, his weapon trained on the gang leader as he called for backup. The tension in the room was electric, as Jack and Max faced off against Rocco and his remaining loyalists. The gang leader, now cornered, wore a smug grin, masking his frustration. Behind him, his men hesitated, their confidence shaken by the sight of Jack's unyielding stance and Max's fierce growl. "You've got guts, Mason," Rocco sneered, his voice laced with venom. "But guts won't save you." Jack's voice was steady, his aim unwavering. "Neither will bravado, Rocco. Surrender now, and this ends without anyone else getting hurt." The gang leader chuckled darkly, his hand tightening around the knife he held. "You think you've already won? Newsflash, cop, you're outnumbered, and this dog won't be enough to save you." Before Rocco could make his next move, Max let out a sharp bark, signaling an impending threat. Jack shifted his attention just in time to see one of Rocco's men reaching for a concealed weapon. With lightning reflexes, he fired a warning shot, the crack of the gun echoing through the room and forcing the would-be attacker to freeze. "Stand down!" Jack barked, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You're only making it worse for yourselves." Max stepped forward, his imposing presence enough to keep the gang members at bay. Even in the face of danger, his loyalty to Jack was unwavering, a bond forged through years of partnership and countless battles against adversity. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Rocco's plan to sabotage the precinct's power grid had succeeded, and the sudden blackout gave his men an opportunity to regroup. Jack's heart pounded as he adjusted to the darkness, his other senses heightened. "Stay close, Max," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The retired war dog's training kicked in, and he positioned himself protectively by Jack's side. Together, they moved cautiously, relying on instinct and memory to navigate the room. In the chaos, Rocco's voice rang out, taunting and mocking. "What now, Mason? You're blind, just like this pathetic mutt of yours. How do you plan to fight what you can't see?" Jack ignored the provocation, his focus on maintaining control of the situation. He reached for his radio, his voice low but resolute. "Ramirez, Hernandez, report. What's your status?" The response crackled through the static. "We're securing the perimeter," Hernandez replied. "But we've lost visual feeds. Do you need backup?" "Negative," Jack said firmly. "Focus on containment. We've got Rocco cornered." As Jack and Max advanced through the darkened room, the sound of shuffling feet and hushed whispers reached their ears. Rocco's men were trying to reposition, hoping to gain the upper hand, but Max's sharp senses detected every movement, and his growls served as a warning to anyone who dared to come too close. Suddenly, a burst of light illuminated the room as one of the gang members fired a flare. The brief illumination revealed Rocco's position, and Jack seized the opportunity. He moved swiftly, his weapon trained on the gang leader. "Drop the knife, Rocco!" Jack commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. But Rocco wasn't ready to give up. With a defiant roar, he lunged at Jack, his blade aimed for the cop's chest. Time seemed to slow as Max sprang into action, intercepting the attack with a ferocity that left Rocco staggering. The struggle was intense, each moment a battle for control. Jack managed to disarm Rocco, the knife clattering to the ground as the two men grappled. Max remained a constant presence, his growls and barks keeping the other gang members at bay. Finally, Jack gained the upper hand, pinning Rocco to the ground. His voice was calm but commanding as he reached for his handcuffs. "It's over, Rocco. You've got nowhere to run." The gang leader glared up at Jack, his bravado finally giving way to defeat. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "There's always another Rocco waiting in the wings." Jack's expression was steely as he responded. "Maybe, but tonight, you're done." As Jack secured Rocco and called for backup, Max stood guard, his piercing gaze daring anyone to challenge them. The other gang members, seeing their leader subdued, began to surrender one by one. Ramirez and Hernandez arrived moments later, their presence solidifying the precinct's control over the situation. "Nice work, Mason," Hernandez said, her tone a mix of relief and admiration. "You and Max just saved this precinct, and probably a lot more." Jack nodded, his focus still on ensuring the area was secure. "We couldn't have done it without the team," he said, his gaze shifting to Max. "But Max, he's the real hero tonight." As the lights were restored and the precinct returned to order, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. The night had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but he and Max had come through it together, stronger than ever. "This isn't over," Rocco muttered as he was led away in handcuffs. "You'll pay for this, Mason." Jack met his gaze, unflinching. "You already tried, and you failed." The precinct was now under control, but the adrenaline from the intense standoff hadn't faded. Officers moved swiftly to secure the scene, ensuring no gang member could escape or cause further disruption. Jack stood near Max, his hand resting on the dog's head, a silent gesture of gratitude for his partner's unwavering courage. But the situation was far from over. As Rocco was led into a holding cell, a commotion broke out in the garage below the precinct. Ramirez's voice crackled over the radio. "Jack, we've got a problem. Rocco's reinforcements just showed up, and they're armed. They've blocked the exit." Jack's jaw tightened. "How many?" "At least 10, heavily armed," Ramirez replied. "They're demanding we release Rocco or they'll storm the building." Jack's mind raced. The precinct wasn't built to withstand a siege, especially not one from a well-armed gang. He glanced at Max, who sat alert, his ears perked as if sensing the danger ahead. The bond between them was unspoken but profound. Both understood the stakes. "Get everyone to the secure areas," Jack ordered into the radio. "No one engages unless absolutely necessary." "I'll handle this." Hernandez appeared at his side, her expression determined. "You're not doing this alone, Jack. We're a team." Jack shook his head. "I appreciate it, but this isn't just about stopping them. It's about making sure Rocco doesn't walk out of here. They'll expect force. We need to outsmart them." Max barked sharply, pulling Jack's attention. The dog's eyes fixed on a nearby ventilation shaft. Jack followed his gaze, and an idea began to form. "If they're focused on the garage, we might have a chance to flank them," he said, a plan taking shape. "Hernandez, gather a small team. I'll use the vent system to get behind them with Max." Hernandez hesitated, knowing the risk involved. "You sure about this?" "If they catch you—" "They won't," Jack interrupted. "But if we don't act now, they'll breach the precinct. Trust me." With a nod, Hernandez relayed instructions to the rest of the team, coordinating their positions to distract the gang while Jack and Max executed their plan. Jack removed his gear, keeping only his sidearm and a flashlight to navigate the narrow ducts. Max followed closely, his movements silent and precise. The ventilation system was cramped and dark, the metallic clang of each step reverberating softly. Jack's pulse quickened as they neared the vent opening above the garage. Peering through the slats, Jack counted the gang members. Ramirez's report was accurate. 10 men, armed with rifles, had surrounded the garage, their vehicles blocking the exits. They were shouting demands, their voices echoing ominously. Jack whispered to Max, his tone low but confident, "Stay closer, buddy. We need to move fast." With careful precision, Jack removed the vent cover and dropped silently onto a stack of crates. Max followed, landing gracefully beside him. They were now behind the gang, hidden in the shadows. Jack signaled to Max, who crept forward, his low growl barely audible. One of the gang members turned, sensing movement, but before he could react, Max lunged, knocking the weapon from his hands and pinning him to the ground. The sudden commotion drew the gang's attention, giving Jack the opening he needed. He emerged from the shadows, his weapon trained on the nearest assailant. "Drop your weapons now," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. For a moment, the gang hesitated, unsure how to respond, but their hesitation was short-lived. One of them raised his weapon, prompting Jack to fire a warning shot. The bullet ricocheted off the concrete floor, the sharp sound reverberating through the garage. "Next one won't miss," Jack warned, his tone cold and unyielding. Max growled, his presence adding weight to Jack's words. The gang exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering. They hadn't expected such a bold counterattack, especially not from a man and his dog. Before the gang could regroup, Hernandez and her team entered from the opposite side, their weapons drawn. "This is your last chance," she shouted. "Surrender now, or face the consequences." Realizing they were surrounded, the gang began to lower their weapons, one by one. Jack and Hernandez moved quickly, disarming them and securing their hands with zip ties. The standoff was over, but the danger hadn't entirely passed. Rocco's men had been subdued, but their leader remained defiant, his smug grin intact as he watched from his holding cell. "How you think this changes anything?" he called out. "You've only delayed the inevitable." Jack approached the cell, his expression calm but resolute. "You're right, Rocco, this isn't over, but tonight you've lost. Your men are in custody, and your operation is done. You'll spend the rest of your life behind bars if you're lucky." Rocco's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the magnitude of his defeat. As the gang members were escorted out under heavy guard, Jack leaned against the wall, exhaustion beginning to set in. Max sat beside him, his tail wagging slightly, a silent acknowledgement of their victory. As the precinct quieted down after the chaotic standoff, Jack found himself standing alone in the garage with Max. The adrenaline coursing through his veins had subsided, leaving a wave of exhaustion in its place. But there was no time to rest. Rocco's smug threats lingered in Jack's mind, an ominous reminder that the battle wasn't entirely over. Hernandez approached, her face reflecting equal parts relief and concern. "We've got all his men locked up," she said, "but Rocco's right. Someone like him doesn't go down without a fight." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. "He's not just threatening me, He's threatening everyone in this city. Max let out a low growl, sensing Jack's unease. The bond between them was unspoken, but undeniable. Jack knelt beside his partner, meeting the dog's intense gaze. "We're not done yet, are we, buddy?" Max wagged his tail faintly, as if to say, "Let's finish this." Suddenly, the precinct's power flickered, plunging the station into temporary darkness. The hum of backup generators kicked in moments later, but the brief blackout was enough to set everyone on edge. Jack's radio crackled to life. "We've got movement outside," Ramirez's voice came through. Tense. "Looks like someone's trying to breach the perimeter." Jack and Hernandez exchanged a glance. "It's Rocco's contingency plan," she said grimly. "He must have backup waiting for a signal." Jack grabbed his gear, motioning for Max to follow. "Let's go. We're not letting them get him out." Outside, the situation had escalated. A group of heavily armed men was attempting to cut through the fence surrounding the precinct. Their intentions were clear. They were here to free Rocco and wouldn't hesitate to use violence to achieve their goal. Jack and Max moved swiftly, flanking the group from the side. Hernandez and her team held the front line, creating a distraction that allowed Jack to get into position unnoticed. Max's training kicked in as Jack gave a silent signal. The dog crept forward, his movements silent and precise. In a flash, Max pounced on the nearest intruder, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The commotion drew the attention of the others, but it was too late. Jack and Hernandez's team moved in, subduing the attackers with practiced efficiency. The fight was intense but short-lived. The gang's reinforcements were unprepared for the coordinated response of the precinct's officers and Max's unparalleled instincts. Within minutes, the attackers were disarmed and restrained, their plan to rescue Rocco thwarted. As the last intruder was taken into custody, Jack surveyed the scene, his breathing heavy. The precinct was secure, and Rocco's empire had taken yet another devastating blow. Inside, Rocco watched through the barred window of his holding cell, his once confident demeanor now replaced by visible frustration. He banged his fist against the glass, his voice echoing through the hallway. "You think you've won, Taylor? This isn't over." Jack approached the cell, his expression calm but resolute. "You're right, Rocco, it's not over. Because now, you're going to face justice for everything you've done." Max stood beside Jack, his eyes locked on Rocco as if he understood the weight of the moment. The dog's presence was a reminder of the loyalty and strength that had carried them through the night. With the precinct finally secure, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. He knelt beside Max, his hand resting on the dog's head. "We did it, partner," he said softly. "They tried to break us, but we stood our ground." Max let out a soft bark, his tail wagging in response. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged through countless challenges and victories like this one. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the city, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the night had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but they had also reinforced his commitment to his duty and the people he served. "Let's head back in," Jack said, standing and leading Max toward the precinct. There was still work to be done, but for now, they could take pride in what they had accomplished. Inside the precinct, the morning light filtered through the high windows, illuminating the aftermath of the night's chaos. Officers moved about, securing evidence and processing the captured intruders. Jack sat in the break room, Max at his side, both of them visibly exhausted but still alert. The air was thick with a mix of relief and anticipation. Rocco was in custody, but his threats still hung over the station like a storm cloud. Hernandez entered the room, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a file in the other. "Jack," she began, her tone hesitant, "Rocco's lawyers are already filing motions to get him out on bail. They're claiming lack of evidence." Jack set his coffee down, his brow furrowing. "Lack of evidence? We caught him red-handed with enough weapons to arm a small militia. It's not just about what we found," Hernandez replied. "It's about witnesses. We need more people willing to come forward and testify against him." At that moment, Ramirez appeared in the doorway. "You're going to want to hear this," he said, gesturing for Jack and Hernandez to follow. The three of them headed to the interrogation room, where Rocco sat smugly behind the glass, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. Despite his precarious situation, Rocco exuded an air of confidence, a man who believed himself untouchable. "He's asking to speak with you," Ramirez said. "Claims he has something you need to hear." Jack exchanged a wary glance with Hernandez before stepping into the room. Max followed closely, his eyes never leaving Rocco. The tension in the air was palpable as Jack took a seat across from the notorious criminal. "What do you want, Rocco?" Jack asked, his tone cold and unyielding. Rocco leaned back in his chair, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Relax, Taylor. I'm just here to make you an offer," Jack scoffed. "An offer? You're in no position to negotiate." Rocco's grin widened. "That's where you're wrong. See, I have connections, powerful ones. You let me walk out of here, and I'll make sure you and your dog retire comfortably. A house on the coast, money in the bank. You'll never have to work another day in your life." Jack's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table. The audacity of the offer was almost laughable, but the implications were deadly serious. "You think you can buy me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything you've done? After what your men did to Max?" Rocco shrugged, his expression indifferent. "Everyone has a price, Taylor. Even you." Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're going to rot in prison, Rocco, and no amount of money or power will change that." As Jack turned to leave, Rocco called after him, his tone mocking. "You think this is over? I'm not the one who's going to pay for this. You are. You and that mutt of yours." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut, but he refused to let Rocco see it. He left the room, Max following closely, and rejoined Hernandez and Ramirez outside. "So he's trying to rattle you," Hernandez said, placing a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "Don't let him." Jack nodded, his resolve hardening. "We need to build an airtight case. I'm not letting him slip through the cracks." Later that day, a breakthrough came in the form of an anonymous tip. A woman, speaking in a hushed and trembling voice, revealed that she had once been part of Rocco's operations, but had fled after witnessing his cruelty firsthand. She agreed to come forward as a witness, her testimony painting a chilling picture of the criminal empire Rocco had built. As her words were recorded and transcribed, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. This was the kind of evidence they needed to dismantle Rocco's network for good. Meanwhile, Max received a visit from the precinct's vet, who conducted a thorough examination and provided a clean bill of health. "He's tough, just like his trainer," the vet said with a smile. Jack crouched beside Max, rubbing his ears affectionately. "We're not done yet, buddy," he said, "but we're getting closer." The final hours of the day were a whirlwind of activity as the precinct prepared its case. Hernandez coordinated with prosecutors, Ramirez tracked down additional leads, and Jack worked tirelessly to compile every piece of evidence they had. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the team gathered in the briefing room, their determination unwavering. "This isn't just about taking down Rocco," Jack said, addressing the group. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, and that when we stand together, we can overcome anything." The room erupted in a chorus of agreement, their collective resolve a testament to the bond they shared as officers of the law. Max barked once, as if to echo their sentiments, earning a round of laughter that lightened the heavy atmosphere. As the precinct settled into a tense but hopeful quiet, Jack sat beside Max, his hand resting on the dog's back. Together, they had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger for it. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Jack knew one thing for sure. They weren't just partners. They were a team, and as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came their way. As dawn broke over the city, the precinct buzzed with cautious optimism. After months of painstaking work, they had built a case strong enough to bring down Rocco and his entire operation. Witness testimonies, physical evidence, and financial records painted an airtight picture of the criminal empire he had constructed and the lengths he had gone to protect it. Jack stood in the center of the briefing room, flanked by his fellow officers. Max sat dutifully at his side, his presence a comforting constant. The team reviewed the final preparations for the court hearing scheduled later that day, confidence mixed with tension as they prepared for what would be a pivotal moment in their fight for justice. Hours later, the courtroom was packed. The gravity of the case had attracted media attention, and the gallery was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and even members of the community who had suffered under Rocco's reign. Jack entered the room with Max at his side, the loyal dog drawing attention and admiration from those present. The prosecutor began their opening statement, laying out the case against Rocco with precision and clarity. Witnesses were called, each providing damning testimony that further solidified the charges. The anonymous witness, a former associate of Rocco's, delivered a particularly powerful account, detailing the fear and brutality that defined his organization. When it came time for Jack to testify, he stood with quiet determination. His words were measured and direct as he recounted his encounters with Rocco and his men, the attack on Max, and the harrowing events of the night they finally brought him into custody. Max, ever vigilant, sat at Jack's feet, a living symbol of their shared resilience. Throughout the proceedings, Rocco maintained his smug demeanor, but cracks began to show as the evidence piled up. His lawyer's objections grew increasingly desperate, and it became clear that their defense was crumbling under the weight of the truth. As the trial reached its climax, the judge called for a recess before delivering the verdict. Jack and Max stepped outside, the cool breeze a welcome reprieve from the intensity of the courtroom. Hernandez joined them, her expression one of cautious hope. "You did good in there," she said, offering Jack a rare smile. "Now it's up to the judge." Jack nodded, his hand resting on Max's head. "Whatever happens, we've done everything we can." When the court reconvened, the tension in the air was palpable. The judge began to speak, their voice steady and authoritative. After reviewing the evidence and testimony presented, it is clear that the defendant, Rocco Marcelli, is guilty of all charges brought against him. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and satisfaction. Justice had been served, and a dangerous criminal was finally being held accountable for his actions. Jack felt a surge of emotion as he glanced down at Max, whose tail wagged subtly as if sensing the victory. Outside the courthouse, Jack was greeted by a small crowd of supporters, including fellow officers and members of the community. Reporters clamored for interviews, but Jack's focus remained on Max. He knelt beside his partner, speaking softly. "We did it, buddy. We made it." In the days that followed, life began to return to normal. The precinct celebrated their victory, acknowledging the hard work and sacrifices that had gone into bringing Rocco to justice. Jack and Max became local heroes, their story inspiring others and reinforcing the importance of perseverance and teamwork. But for Jack, the true reward was the bond he shared with Max. Together, they had faced danger, uncertainty, and seemingly insurmountable odds. And together, they had emerged stronger, proving that courage and loyalty could triumph even in the face of darkness. As Jack reflected on the journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His partnership with Max was more than a working relationship. It was a testament to the power of trust and determination, and as they prepared for their next shift, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, side by side. This story of courage, loyalty, and justice reminds us of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. If this tale moved you, consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and heroism. And don't forget to like this video and share it with others who might need a reminder that sometimes the toughest battles are won with the help of those we trust most. Let us know in the comments. What inspires you to keep pushing forward even in the face of adversity? We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.